Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. This season, we're having sweaty conversations for change. We're talking with guests about uncomfortable conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion needed to pivot towards positive change. We do this podcast because it's important that all voices are heard, all people are seen, and all people feel a sense of belonging in their workplaces. Let's meet this week's guest. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have a dear colleague, mentor, friend, ally with us today. Known Jon for many, many years. So welcome to Jon Dartt. He's vice president at Delta Faucet Company. He has 34 years of experience in the kitchen and bath industry, including more than 28 years at Delta Faucet Company. He brings extensive knowledge to his role as vice president. He does things like developing domestic and international trade strategies for the company, as working with his team to execute that strategy. Previously, he led sales and also was a sales manager for the company. He has a broad knowledge of the industry and years of relationship building and sales to help him serve on several industry advisory committees, and he helps move strategies forward. He serves on the board of directors for Home Aid, a nonprofit provider of housing for the homeless, and Clear Software, a solutions provider that enables organizations to streamline core business. And he's also from the University of Wisconsin, oh geez, as a Buckeye, and a graduate of Masco's Executive Leadership Development Program. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's great to be here. Appreciate the fine introduction there. It's been a while. I mean, as you said, we've known each other for many, many years. First working with you. What was the name of the company? I drew a blank when you...
Yeah, prior. So even before Next Pivot Point, which has now been in existence for 7 years, I did consulting, and
Yes.
Jon was his team was one of our clients.
Yes.
And by way of that, I've had the opportunity to stay in touch, which is always fun. I mean, we're probably going on like 10 years, Jon.
Exactly.
So it's always fun to have former clients, current clients, and guests and friends on the show. And Jon, the reason I think it'd be so awesome to have you talk to us is y'all have been through an amazing DEI journey over the last 3 years. I mean, since beginning to and now very much in the trenches of the work. I love you give us a window. But before we do that, let's start with maybe an uncomfortable diversity conversation you have, and something that's been, permeated, or something that stuck with you over the years with diversity.
Sure. This is a story of a situation that happened several years ago when I was in college, but it's really been etched into my brain, and it's just something that I carry with me, and I guess why I'm so passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But so I have an older sister who's no longer with us, but I had an older sister who moved out when I was, still in high school, and she moved to New York, and she met a gentleman, a Black gentleman, and they fell in love and got married. They actually eloped, and then he's an entertainer. So he if you've heard of the musical group, which I'm sure you have, the Coasters or the Platters, band out of the 50s and 60s, he was a singer, and they had toured all over the world, but they had set up a residency at a hotel in Las Vegas. So my sister and her husband moved to Las Vegas and started living their life there. Well, when I decided to go to college, I was going to major in hotel and restaurant management, which is one of the best schools in the country at UNLV. So I packed up my bags as a 20-year-old and moved to Las Vegas to attend school there, and I lived with them. And, I lived with my sister, and I planned to live with her husband, right? And all was good. But I didn't realize that this was an uncomfortable situation for my parents, specifically my father, who I did not see as somebody, really who was racist, growing up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We really didn't think about those things or talk about it. And so I moved into their home in Las Vegas and lived there for 2 years with them. But what's interesting is that, in that 2-year period, my parents never came to see me, during the 2 years that I was there. My dad never had a conversation with me or my sister or her husband, Randy, during that period. And, and the relationship was never quite the same while I was out there. And it took some time for things to kind of get back to normal with my parents when I moved back. So, learning about this, is that they didn't approve of this interracial marriage. It didn't have really anything to do with whether they loved each other or not. It was that it was an interracial marriage. And living with them for 2 years, I saw that these were two beautiful people who loved each other. They had a son, my nephew, and they lived a great life together. And boy, I got exposed, not only living in Las Vegas, I got exposed to some really interesting things, but I got exposed to a really a unique lifestyle and experience, kind of following the life of an entertainer and recognized by tens of thousands of fans who would come and see them on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So it was just, it just opened my eyes to say, gosh, this isn't about just people. This is something deeper. And it goes back to the old saying of, people aren't born racist. It's taught. It's somewhere along the way. And that, like I said, that incident or that situation, that experience that I had just helped change who I am and what it means for me around, our DE&I strategy.
Yep.
My nephew is 41 years old today, and he's got 2 young boys, beautiful young boys, but I see the challenges that my nephew goes through as being a Black man in America and being a Black man in business. And I want to make sure that I do everything that I can to help he and his boys, have the experiences and the opportunities that I've had.
Jon, gosh, thanks so much for your vulnerability and sharing that personal story. I can only imagine, the experiences you had. And like you said, like being torn between your family about something as insignificant as skin color, but not insignificant to someone's identity, but to think you didn't support the marriage just because of that, which is very commonplace. I mean, I think we're not that far from it, right? We're 50 years from that being legal. So even think that thinking is still entrenched here as we approach 2022, even.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
But it feels to me like it opened your eyes. Like it opened your eyes to like, okay, I was told like everyone's equal. We all treat each other fairly. Like everything's cool. And then you have this experience. You're like, maybe not so much as a young person. I would venture to say maybe that gave you kind of the footing to be able to talk about DEI in the earlier days. Because I know at Delta, when they first launched, the diversity initiative, you and I had a lot of conversations just a few years ago about, oh, wow, they're asking me to be a sponsor. Like, why would they ask me? Or like, what do I do? I'm the white guy. But because of the lived experiences, the window you've had for your nephew and your sister's relationship, I'm guessing you're probably putting out the vibe of like, I'm inclusive. I'm a white guy. I get it. I get it a little bit.
Well, I think what's interesting is that as we started our diversity, equity, and inclusion journey a little more than 3 years ago, we had no definition of what it meant. We had no definition of where we wanted to be and who we should become as a corporate citizen. And at the time, our president, sat at the executive table with 9 of us and said, who would like to be the executive sponsor? He wasn't going to, because he wanted one of us to take the lead and the opportunity. And At the time on the executive team, there were seven. I think there were 7 men and 2 women, and all white men, which is nothing wrong, but they were all white men, and we kind of looked around the table at each other, and nobody stepped up, and I went, "This is not right." And so I said, "I'll do it. I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to be stretched." And so I took the responsibility of being the executive sponsor for that first year of our journey.
That's cool. Tell us what those early conversations were like with the committee and getting folks together and kind of getting people to rally around diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, it was again, not only did we not have a definition of ultimately who we are and who we wanted to be, but Masco, our parent company, was also developing and defining the strategy as well. So we wanted to make sure that we were aligned and consistent with how Masco was heading, and that there was consistency as much as possible between Delta company and the other Masco business units, because there's multiple companies that roll up underneath the Masco umbrella. So there were sort of a lot of considerations there, but it was really about developing our strategy and our mission for DE&I, and setting up some core teams of individuals that had an interest in moving our mission forward. And yeah, there was interest throughout the organization, but there was a lot of hesitancy, quite frankly. And I think when people think of diversity, equity, inclusion, individuals think that it's focused on females, or it's focused on people of color, and which that's part of it, certainly. But we have a huge white male population at Delta Faucet Company that we also needed to address and bring along and make sure that they were on board with our direction, and that became a real challenge. Ultimately, we developed our strategy really around a couple of pillars, and one of those pillars is the workplace. The other pillar is the community, and so under the workplace, we set goals around retention, such as improving our overall attrition percentage, improving our engagement scores by our associates, and just the overall diversity percentage for people that work at Delta Faucet Company. We also focused on recruiting, right? Just we never thought about how we recruited people, that recruited teammates in the past, but now we are looking at the percentage of diverse candidates that are in the final, that are not only looking at percentage of candidates that are in the consideration set, but also in the final interview process. We're also looking at increasing our membership and engagement in our business resource groups, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then just the percent of ethnicity, diversity in leadership roles. So we have very few females and or people of color in our leadership roles. And we started to look at that and said, gosh, this is no wonder sometimes it's difficult to recruit people to come to this organization in Central Indiana when you don't have this diversity within your team. So one of the pillars was workplace, and then the other pillar was, DFC community. And this was really focused on developing these business resource groups within Delta Faucet Company. One would be working parents group. So what are the needs and issues and opportunities and challenges that our working parents are facing today? A young professionals group, right? So those individuals in our company who are looking for new stretch assignments and opportunities at Delta or within Masco. The multicultural group, which focuses on education and celebration of events like Lunar New Year or the Hispanic Heritage Month. And then the last business resource group would be women in leadership, right? And for those working ladies who want to hear the success stories of other women that they work with, or maybe in the Indianapolis community. So, so those are the things that we really ultimately focused on. And then this year, which I'm really excited about, we developed an initiative called a monthly snackable. Okay, so a snackable is really, right, like a small bite that you take on an issue to build awareness, encourage participation, and conversation. So a snackable might be on bias, or it might be on the use of pronouns in the workplace, or it might be on Indiana Black Expo's 50th celebration and what that means to the city of Indianapolis and what it means to the Black community. And every department head, like myself, is required or asked to take 10 to 15 minutes every month and consume a snackable. And the topic is the same for every department each month, but we bite off these small pieces, get people talking and get them engaged versus pushing it onto someone and jamming it down their throat. So the snackable has really been something that's been very successful at us to really address the issues within DE&I.
I love the bite size. I'd say that a lot. Bite-size learning. Make it
Yes.
simple for people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many reasons why that's such a great strategy, John. And thanks for setting us up. Like, I mean, there were some great learnings you shared from a strategy perspective with your pillars inside and outside of the company. So I think companies usually do one or the other, not both. So it's really good to think internally and externally, how to measure it. I was a part of the early days of creating that
Yeah.
scorecard, and y'all had some, the hesitance was like, well, we don't know if we have that data. We can ask HR. It's like, yes, you have the data. Just build it,
Yeah.
measure it, right, along the employee experience. And then the BRGs, getting these business resources groups set up successfully and aligning it with the needs and providing education and support with these quick snackables. Because just to build off of that, I think there's so many reasons why that snackable approach works. One, Zoom fatigue is a real thing. Right? Like we're
Yes.
so sick of looking at ourselves on camera all day, every day, right? To go to another training or event just wasn't as exciting as it was even a year ago.
Exactly.
And then two, I mean, the whole mental health and fatigue factor that people are facing just with their lives, right? I'm working now more than ever. I'm doing all the things I need to do. The last thing I want to do is like extra training, extra things for something that may not, let's be honest, well rewarded in my company. This is kind of a self-growth, do it on your own time kind of thing. So I got to work longer. So I love this idea of 10, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, John, like what snackables have worked well? If you have like ideas for topics or thoughts on like things, resources that people can spend their time doing the bite-size approach with, what's worked content wise or approach wise.
Well, gosh, there's been a lot of topics that we've talked about. Bias being one of them, and because bias is such a broad category, people don't even know that they're biased. I came home from Florida yesterday, and I had a moment of unconscious bias, and I just laughed because I went, John, you're supposed to be a practitioner here, and you just fell all over yourself. But that's a popular topic. I think also some things that have worked really well too is just some of the areas that we focused on within the Indianapolis area. And I didn't mention this, but a couple of events and or groups in Indianapolis have been our focus. So Indy Pride, we've really focused on Indy Pride, and we've really focused on Indiana Black Expo. And the Indiana Black Expos and Indy Pride yes, you think of the parade for Indy Pride, you think of the expo in the month of July, but there are things that go on all year long. In fact, last week I attended the Indy Pride Rainbow Chamber of Commerce Awards downtown. And so, it's completely separated from, their big event, their big parade, but there's things going on all the time. And it's really just about exposing our team to what's happening within our own community and how we can become connected and what it means for a company like Delta to show our diversity, not only to the community, but to people that may consider wanting to come to work for us.
Yeah, I mean it's a twofer, right? Not only are we giving our employees some unique experiences, but we're getting broader community exposure, and you'll be seen as an employer of choice in the community as well.
Correct. And hopefully we'll be seen as an employer of choice outside of the community
Sure.
because I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges, being an Indiana-based company, a Midwest company, Midwest values. There's a lot to be said for that. But, for somebody who may live in Atlanta or New York or Boston, we want to be able to show that, hey, we can compete with a Boston company or we can compete with a company, even though we're here in Indiana.
Yeah.
And these are ways to show that.
Yeah. And I know in the early days too, we talked about our location being in a more white dominated part of town. There are a lot of, excuses we could have made about, well, we're not that diverse because of where we are, but it doesn't take long. You can travel 2 miles south and see a lot more diversity from your office. So
Sure.
Sometimes we got to go to other places to, connect with other communities. And then you bring a great theme to the table is, the workplace is virtual. It's probably hybrid for the long term. We can attract talent all over the world, all over the United States. We're not limited to having people have to relocate as much anymore. And so this broad access to talent, how can we be seen so that when we do get more diverse talent, we feel more inclusive too?
Correct. Yes.
John, I'm curious, being a white male senior leader, you said early on, like the white guys, and I remember doing some of the focus groups and like, oh gosh, there's a fear, I think, from the majority group. And it's very common to have that fear of like, what's my place in this? Like, they don't want me. This kind of feels like I don't belong. This feels exclusive to me. What do you do to navigate those conversations with other white men that might be fearful, might not understand diversity? How do we bring more of them into the conversation?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, for me, it's it's showing others in our company that I'm part of the opportunity and part of the solution to create a more inclusive and diverse organization. And I hope that when other white males in the building see that a white male who's an executive for the company is engaged and committed, that they'll go, all right, this is a guy who's been here 28 years, seen a lot of things, been through a lot. Here's a guy, hopefully, that we trust, in me, they trust me, and they're willing to have those conversations. And so I highly encourage those type of conversations. I don't shy from them. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got a position that they're in along their journey, and none of it is wrong. And I just want to engage with people wherever they're at, and again, bite off a little bit at a time. I'm not there to preach. I'm not there to tell them how they should understand or accept DE&I, but I just want to have an open conversation with them and let them get to a point of moving forward at their own pace.
Yeah, they got to self-select to come in, but I think you're right. You're modeling that from a senior level. You're creating what we call kind of that psychologically safe place to have a conversation, meet people where they're at. So I love that, John. I hope is there's more of you in the future.
Yeah. Yes. And again, as I said, as a department, each functional area talks about snackables during our monthly get-together. So on my team, I have 60 people that get together on a Zoom call once a month, and we talk about a lot of different things in our meeting, but we definitely talk about a DE&I snackable, and we highly encourage the conversation. We provide a safe haven for people to speak their mind with no negative comments or repercussions for how they feel. And, it's taken some time to get there, but I think people do feel comfortable in saying, hey, here's where I agree with this, how we're moving forward, or here's how I'm not aligned, or here's how somebody else on our team feels and I'm speaking for them, but
Sure.
yeah, we just want to encourage that type of conversation. And
That's good.
eventually we will all be moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many reasons to think, demographics are changing. Certainly Gen Z is going to be a lot more diverse than previous
Yes.
generations. So I think people know like things are changing. I want to be more inclusive. We got to work on this diversity thing. But the hesitance, I think what slows people down is it feels so daunting and overwhelming. And it feels like, yeah, I might bite off a little bit, but I'm not going to get the whole thing. So that whole snackable approach, that bite-sized approach makes a lot of sense because you're meeting people where they're at, providing education tools, which we know is a huge part of what I call the ally journey. And you're talking about it from a senior leadership, down to frontline level to communicate the importance of it. So you're reinforcing it and having a discussion about it. And it shouldn't have to take a ton of time to learn this stuff. I joke all the time, like my bookshelves are filled with diversity books, right? I've listened to thousands of podcasts about this. It's 7 years they put in to learn this. And for people that just started learning about this, you've been on the journey a while, but for folks in your team, this might be like day one. Like, how do I start? It shouldn't feel like this huge elephant. It should
Yes.
feel like this bite-sized approach.
Yes. Exactly.
John, and wrapping up today, love all the great ideas you shared. Oh, the snackables. We need that in more organizations. So definitely take note of that, listeners. But I'm curious, when you think about the diversity and inclusion journey going forward, thinking into next year and beyond, what's on the horizon at Delta Faucet Company, or what might you recommend to other business leaders that you're still kicking the tires on this, trying to figure out how to work in DEI?
Sure. Well, at Delta, we have strategic initiatives that we agree on each year and execute on. So these are big stretch projects. That's how I would define them. Big stretch projects where we don't yet have the capability to execute flawlessly. So we've got to build the capability, build the muscle to execute on these big initiatives. And it's everything from developing a direct-to-consumer business model, or advancing our manufacturing processes. And we develop this list every single year. And in 2021, the beginning of the year, DE&I was one of those big initiatives. And we made it one of our 6 most strategic, important initiatives. And not only did we make it one of the top 6, we made it number 1. So in other words, if we ever get into resource issues, if there's ever any issues with not being able to complete something, this one never gets touched because it is number 1 in the organization. And everything really kind of plays off of DE&I. Above everything, above our sales goals, above our profit goals, above our manufacturing processes, DE&I is number 1. And that's been, broadly communicated and understood throughout the organization. So that's what got us, to this point in 2021. But you can't just say, okay, we did that in 2021. Let's move on and let's have 6 new initiatives. So actually, DE&I will continue to be one of our top priorities going into 2022. And it likely will be the number 1 initiative again. We will start voting on that very shortly. But although we've made some great progress this year, the journey has just started. And it's going to take, years to do it. And the only way that you can do it is by developing, the repeatable processes and getting people to buy in and bring them along in their journey on the way along. And we'll get there. But your question was, what would other organizations do, or what should they consider? Make it your number one priority above all else.
Music to my ears, John. I mean, if only this was our number one stated priority. Because in the way you said that, I think it's easy to put lip service to this. Like, this is our number one priority. And then like, I'll have conversations with that client and the DEI officer is like powerless and under-resourced. It's like, you might be saying it, but you're not really doing it. Like, there's a disconnect between what you're saying and doing. So I love what you said. Like, we will never take budget from this. This is more important than sales and profitability. I mean, that is really what it takes to show this is a non-negotiable. That's how important this is to set it as a clear top priority. I'd say too, it's interesting because, I always say diversity is, inclusion is not an initiative. And the way you frame that is, it's exactly like it might have once been, but you've realized how it has to be embedded in the culture over time to give it the breadth, the time it takes to grow.
Correct. Yeah. And it is embedded not only within Delta Faucet Company, but embedded within the other business units within Masco and at Masco as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just lip service that Masco is paying to us, but they're invested as well.
Yep. They're resourcing it.
Yep.
Yeah. I keep saying like the day will come when a chief diversity officer or the head of diversity gets promoted to like the CEO or president. Like that's when we'll know we're there. And there might be examples out there, listeners, send me them if you can think of them, but I can't think of one yet. Because that's when you show it's like really important. Like that's a career path that gets you to like the top spot. So
yeah, good point.
Still some work to do. John, yes. Thanks so much for sharing your story with us, your personal story, your career journey. Thanks for being a sponsor and ally. And John really walks the talk. He's doing the things in the community and having this conversation with his team in a real genuine way. So it's always great to learn from the pros out there.
Thank you.
John, any parting words, anything you want to listen, tidbits we haven't talked about that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah. I mean, really, in my journey, you've heard the phrase, you don't need to boil the ocean. And I really believe that when it comes to DE&I, each one of us, can make an impact on how we approach DE&I, and if each one of us, bites off a snackable and focuses in a specific area that you have interest in, we can all make a difference. And that's really what it's about. Don't try to solve all the issues and concerns and problems out there. Just do what you can as an individual, both in your personal and professional life, and it will make a difference if everybody does the same thing.
Yep. Do you set the tone and others will follow? And yeah, that snackable approach.
Yes.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much for making the time today. It's been so awesome to talk with you.
Thanks. Great seeing you as well, Julie.
Thank you for listening to the Diversity Pivot podcast. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you're on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our new signature Lead Like an Ally online self-paced learning program. It's comprehensive and it includes an online learning platform packed with tools, stories, and ideas to become an even better ally. Head over to leadlikeanally.com to learn more.